Potato peels went back into the skillet on Thursday nights, and nobody at that table dared call it garbage. Your grandmother never threw anything away. Not the bones, not the bread heels. What other people called garbage, she called Tuesday night supper. Something most people toss straight into the trash becomes a full meal at number 19. And the scrap behind number 5 is one nobody ever thinks to save. Number 14 kept families in the hill country fed through winter with nothing but crumbled cornbread and cold buttermilk. These were not scraps to her. They were ingredients the grocery store never had to sell her twice. Here are 25 kitchen scraps your grandmother turned into meals and never wasted. Number 25. Carrot tops. Most people twisted the greens off a bunch of carrots and dropped them straight in the trash without a second thought. Your grandmother kept them. She rinsed the feathery tops, chopped them fine, and used them the way you would use parsley or fresh herbs in a soup. Tossed into a pot of chicken broth with some onion and a diced potato, those carrot tops gave the whole thing a peppery, slightly bitter edge that made the broth taste deeper than it had any right to. She also pounded them into a rough pesto with garlic, salt, and whatever oil was in the pantry. Spread on toast or stirred into noodles, it tasted green and alive. A 50-cent bunch of carrots gave her the vegetable for dinner and the seasoning for tomorrow's lunch. She never bought dried herbs when the answer was already sitting on top of the thing she just peeled. Number 24. Watermelon rind. When your grandmother cut up a watermelon in July, she saved every piece of that thick white rind. She peeled off the green skin, cubed the white part, and simmered it in a jar with vinegar, sugar, cloves, and a stick of cinnamon. After a few days in the icebox, those cubes turned translucent and tasted like a sweet pickle with a hint of spice. Watermelon rind pickles showed up at summer suppers across the South from Georgia to East Texas, lined up next to the deviled eggs and the sliced tomatoes. Other women skipped the pickling and fried the rind with a little salt, pork, and onion until it went soft and savory, almost like a squash. In parts of rural Alabama, grandmothers candied the rind with sugar syrup and laid the pieces out on wax paper to dry. One watermelon gave her fruit for the table, pickles for the pantry, and candy for the grandchildren, and the only thing she threw away was the green skin. Before I go any further, for the folks who want more recipes like these, ones your grandmother would have recognized, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of more meals like the ones you are hearing about right now, all in one place. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I am not going to push it again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 23. Potato peels. Most people peeled a potato and scraped the skin straight into the garbage. Your grandmother peeled a potato and saw a second dish. She tossed those peels into a skillet with a little bacon grease, salt, and pepper, and fried them until they curled up crispy at the edges. During lean years, fried potato skins were not a restaurant appetizer. They were supper. Some grandmothers boiled them into a thin potato peel soup with an onion and whatever drippings were left in the roasting pan. Either way, those peels carried more flavor than most people gave them credit for. She did not need a label to know that. She just knew you did not throw away food that still had something left to give. Number 22. The chicken carcass. After Sunday dinner, that picked-over bird did not go in the trash. It went into the biggest pot in the kitchen. Your grandmother dropped the whole carcass in with water, an onion cut in half, a few celery stalks, and a handful of peppercorns. She let it simmer for hours, sometimes all afternoon, until the bones gave up everything they had. The broth that came off those bones was richer than anything in a can. She strained it, picked off whatever meat was still clinging to the joints, and turned it into chicken soup that lasted 3 days. One roasted chicken became 2 meals before she ever spent another dime. That carcass was not leftovers. It was the opening act for the best soup of the week. Number 21. Beet greens. When beets came from the garden, most people twisted off the tops and threw them away. Your grandmother kept every leaf. She washed them, chopped them rough, and wilted them down in a hot pan with a splash of vinegar and a pinch of salt. Those greens tasted somewhere between spinach and Swiss chard, earthy and a little sweet. and they cooked down to almost nothing in minutes. Some grandmothers stirred them into soup. Others served them alongside the beets themselves, so you got the whole plant on one plate. It was a meal that cost nothing extra because the scraps came free with the vegetables she already bought. Nobody called it farm to table back then. They just called it not being wasteful. There was no name for it back then. Nobody called it sustainability or zero waste or conscious eating. Your grandmother just called it common sense. She grew up in a world where throwing food away was closer to a sin than a habit. The garbage can in her kitchen was the smallest thing in the room, and it stayed that way on purpose. Everything got used. Bones became broth. Stale bread became supper. Grease became seasoning. Scraps went to the dog or the garden or the next pot of soup. It was not a philosophy, it was math. When money was tight and the nearest store was a long drive down a dirt road, every scrap had to pull its weight. The modern world spends billions trying to solve a food waste crisis that she solved every single day with a stock pot and a little patience. Number 20. Citrus peels. Your grandmother never threw away a lemon rind or an orange peel. She grated the zest into cake batter, cookie dough, and glazes. She dried strips of peel on the windowsill and dropped them into hot water for tea. She simmered orange peels in sugar syrup until they candied into chewy, bittersweet strips that she packed into tins at Christmas. In the South, dried lemon peel went into sachets tucked into dresser drawers to keep linens smelling fresh. Some grandmothers rubbed a cut lemon half across a wooden cutting board to kill odors. A bag of oranges that cost a few cents gave her the juice for breakfast, the zest for baking, and the peels for candy, tea, and cleaning. She squeezed every last thing out of that fruit, and none of it went to waste. Number 19. Celery tops and leaves. Grocery stores sell celery in bunches, and most people snap off the pale bottom stalks and throw the rest away. The leafy tops, the dark outer ribs, the little yellow leaves at the heart. Your grandmother saved all of it. Those parts had more flavor than the stalks people actually ate. She chopped the leaves fine and tossed them into soups, stews, and pot roasts the way another cook would reach for parsley. The dark outer stalks, too tough to eat raw, went into the stock pot along with the onion ends and carrot tops she had been saving in a bag in the freezer. In parts of the Midwest, farm wives kept what they called a soup bag in the icebox. Every time they trimmed a vegetable, the scraps went in. When the bag was full, it went into a pot with water and simmered for hours. The result was a vegetable broth so rich and layered that no two batches ever tasted the same. It depended on what you had cooked that week. If there had been a lot of carrots, the broth ran sweet, heavy on onion skins, and it turned golden and deep. Celery tops gave it that green, savory backbone that tied everything together. Your grandmother never would have called it a flavor profile. She would have said it tastes right. And she would have been right. That bag of scraps, the parts of the vegetable that everyone else put in the compost, became the base for every bowl of soup she served that winter. Some women wrote the date on the bag so they knew when to use it. Others just knew by the weight of it in their hand. Either way, nothing from that celery bunch ever saw the inside of a garbage can. The whole plant earned its place at the table, leaf by leaf, stalk by stalk. Number 18. Leftover rice. Cold rice sitting in the icebox was never a problem. It was a head start on tomorrow's dinner. Your grandmother fried it in a hot skillet with whatever she had. A beaten egg, some chopped onion, leftover vegetables, a splash of soy sauce if the pantry had it. The rice that was too dry and clumpy to serve again on its own turned golden and crispy at the edges in that hot pan. In the South, leftover rice got formed into patties, dipped in egg and breadcrumbs, and fried until the outside was crunchy and the inside was soft. Some people called them rice croquettes. Others just called them rice cakes. Whatever the name, a pot of plain boiled rice that nobody wanted to eat twice became something new the next day. Number 17. Bacon rind. Before bacon came pre-sliced in plastic, it arrived from the butcher with the rind still on. Your grandmother trimmed it and saved every piece. She dropped that thick strip of smoked rind into a pot of beans or greens and let it simmer for hours. It gave off salt and smoke and fat, seasoning the entire pot without a single extra ingredient. In parts of Appalachia, a piece of bacon rind was the only meat that went into a pot of pinto beans all week. You did not eat the rind itself. You fished it out at the end. But everything it touched tasted like it had been cooking all day in a smokehouse. One piece of rind, zero waste, and a pot of beans that fed the whole family. Number 16. Vegetable trimmings, onion skins, carrot ends, parsley stems, mushroom stems, the woody bottoms of asparagus. Your grandmother saved all of it. She kept a container in the back of the freezer, and every time she cooked, the trimmings went in. When it was full, she dumped the whole thing into a pot of water and simmered it for a few hours. What came out was a vegetable stock so full of flavor that it made everything better. Soup, gravy, even just cooking rice in it instead of plain water changed the whole meal. She turned what others discarded into the secret ingredient behind half the dishes she served that week. It never cost a single cent beyond what she was already spending on the vegetables themselves. Number 15. The turkey carcass. The day after Thanksgiving, while half the country was eating cold turkey sandwiches, your grandmother was already working on something better. That picked clean bird went into her biggest pot with water, onion, celery, and a bay leaf. She simmered it until the bones fell apart, then strained the whole thing and started building soup from scratch. She added egg noodles or rice, whatever vegetables were in the crisper, and chunks of turkey she pulled from the carcass before it went in the pot. One Thanksgiving turkey turned into a soup that lasted the rest of the weekend. It was never the same recipe twice because it depended on what she had. But it was always good, and it always started with a carcass that most people would have thrown straight into the trash. Number 14. Stale cornbread and buttermilk. In the mountains of Appalachia and across the rural South, this was not a snack. It was supper. When the cornbread on the counter went dry and crumbly, your grandmother crumbled it into a tall glass or a bowl and poured cold buttermilk over it. That was the meal. No heat, no cooking, no fuss. You ate it with a spoon. To anyone who did not grow up with it, cornbread and buttermilk sounds like poverty food, and in a way, it was. Families ate it because they had cornmeal and they had milk from the cow out back, and some nights that was the entire grocery list. But the people who grew up on it will tell you it was one of the most satisfying things they ever ate. The tang of the buttermilk cut through the grain of the cornbread, and the texture was somewhere between cereal and porridge, soft and crumbly and cold. In summer, after a long day of farm work, it was the only thing anyone wanted. In winter, it filled the gap between one real meal and the next. Some families added a sliced onion on the side. Others stirred in a spoonful of sorghum for sweetness. It varied by county, by family, by what was in the pantry that night. But the base was always the same. Stale cornbread that had no business being on the table anymore, brought back to life by a glass of buttermilk that cost almost nothing. It is one of those meals that sounds like nothing on paper. Then you try it, and you understand why entire generations in the hill country were raised on it, and why most of them still make it when nobody is looking, even now, even with a full refrigerator. Your grandmother did not take a cooking class. She did not follow influencers or watch tutorials. She learned by standing next to her own mother in a kitchen that was too hot in summer and too cold in winter, watching what happened to food when you paid attention. She learned that bones had a second life, that stale bread was not ruined, just waiting, that the worst thing you could do with food was let it sit until it spoiled and then throw it away. That was the real waste, not the scrap itself, but the failure to see what it could still become. Every grandmother who saved her bacon grease and boiled her chicken bones was practicing something the food industry spent decades trying to make people forget. You did not need to buy more. You needed to use what you already had. Number 13. Shrimp shells. Along the Gulf Coast and up through the Carolinas, your grandmother never tossed those shrimp shells after peeling a pound of shrimp for supper. She swept every head, tail, and papery shell into a pot with water, a bay leaf, and a few peppercorns, then let it simmer for half an hour. That pale pink stock became the backbone of shrimp bisque, seafood gumbo, and rice pilaf. It had a sweetness and a depth that plain water could never give. Some women dried the shells on a baking sheet in a low oven, then crushed them with a rolling pin into a powder they stirred into cornbread batter or sprinkled over grits. It added a faint ocean flavor that made people ask what the secret ingredient was. A pound of shrimp gave her the meal, and the shells gave her the next 3 meals after that. Nothing from the sea went to waste in her kitchen. Number 12. Overripe bananas. When those bananas on the counter turned brown and soft and nobody wanted to eat them, your grandmother never dropped them in the trash. She mashed them with a fork and stirred them into a simple batter with flour, sugar, and egg, and a splash of buttermilk. That banana bread came out of the oven dense and sweet, and it filled the whole house with a smell that pulled everybody into the kitchen. In the Midwest, women sliced overripe bananas into rounds, dipped them in pancake batter, and fried them in a skillet with butter until they turned golden and crispy. Those banana fritters showed up on Saturday morning plates right next to the bacon. Other grandmothers froze the brown bananas and blended them later into milkshakes to stretch a half glass of milk into a full dessert. The worse those bananas looked on the outside, the sweeter they were on the inside, and she knew that before any cookbook told her. Number 11. Chicken skin and fat. When your grandmother trimmed a chicken, the skin and the lumps of yellow fat did not go in the trash. They went into a pan on low heat. Slowly, the fat rendered out into a clear golden liquid that she strained into a jar. That was schmaltz, and in Jewish, Eastern European, and Southern kitchens alike, it was worth more than butter. She spread it on bread, fried potatoes in it, used it to start a roux for soup. The crispy bits left behind after rendering got sprinkled over noodles or eaten straight with a pinch of salt. One raw chicken produced enough rendered fat to flavor 3 or 4 meals after the bird itself was long gone. Nothing wasted, nothing bought, and everything tasted richer for it. Number 10. Leftover mashed potatoes. Cold mashed potatoes from last night had a way of sitting in the icebox, looking like nobody wanted them. Your grandmother wanted them. She scooped them out, mixed in a beaten egg and a handful of flour, shaped them into thick patties, and fried them in a hot skillet until both sides were golden and crispy. Potato cakes. Some families called them potato patties. Others called them fried mashed potatoes. But the idea was the same everywhere. A leftover that nobody felt like reheating became a brand new dish with a crunchy outside and a soft, creamy inside. She served them for breakfast alongside eggs or for supper with a side of applesauce. The mashed potatoes that sat forgotten in the back of the icebox ended up being the best thing on the plate the next morning. There is something the food industry never figured out how to sell, and that is a meal for one person made from what is already in the kitchen. Your grandmother understood that cooking for yourself was not less important than cooking for a crowd. After the children left and the house got quiet, she still saved her scraps. She still kept the grease jar by the stove. She still turned yesterday's leftovers into today's lunch. Not because she had to, but because she had always done it that way and saw no reason to stop. Cooking was how she took care of herself. It was proof that she was still here, still capable, still worth the effort of a hot meal, a potato cake for one, a bowl of soup made from bones. It did not take much, but it mattered more than anyone realized. Number 9. Sour milk. Before modern refrigeration became standard, milk that sat too long did not go bad the way store-bought milk does today. It soured, turning thick and tangy, almost like a thin yogurt. Your grandmother never poured it down the drain. Sour milk was the secret behind the fluffiest biscuits and the lightest pancakes she ever made. The acid in the milk reacted with baking soda to create lift, and the fat made everything tender. She poured it straight into the batter without measuring, adjusting the flour by feel until the consistency looked right. In farm country, sour milk was so common and so useful that some women let it happen on purpose. They left a jar on the counter overnight, knowing that by morning it would be exactly what they needed for a batch of biscuits. Buttermilk from the store worked on the same principle, but plenty of families never bought it because the cow and the kitchen clock took care of it for free. Sour milk also went into cornbread, cake batter, dumplings, and quick breads that rose fast and came out soft. It was one of those kitchen scraps that was not a scrap at all, just a different stage of the same ingredient. Your grandmother did not see a glass of milk going bad. She saw tomorrow's breakfast waiting to be mixed into a bowl of flour. And she was right every single time. The difference between spoiled and soured was something she knew by smell and by touch. Modern refrigeration took that knowledge away from most families, but the women who grew up on farms carried it with them their whole lives, and their biscuits were better for it. Number 8. Apple cores and peels. When your grandmother peeled apples for a pie, she collected every curl of skin and every seedy core in a bowl. She dropped them into a pot of water with a little sugar and cinnamon, and simmered the whole thing until the kitchen smelled like October. She strained out the solids and had a jar of apple scrap jelly that spread across toast like store-bought but tasted better. In Appalachian kitchens, women packed the cores and peels into a crock with water and a cloth over the top and let them sit for weeks until they fermented into vinegar. That homemade apple cider vinegar went into pie crust, into salad dressing, into the pot of greens simmering on the stove. Some grandmothers boiled the peels down with sugar into a thick syrup they poured over pancakes on Sunday mornings. She turned the part of the apple that most people threw away into 3 different staples, and not one of them cost her an extra cent. Number 7. Beef sweet and fat trimmings. When your grandmother bought a roast, the butcher left the fat on. She trimmed it at home and saved every scrap. Beef fat, rendered slowly in a low pan, turned into tallow, a clean, hard cooking fat that could handle high heat better than butter and lasted months in a cool pantry. She used it for frying, for greasing baking pans, and for making pie crust that came out so flaky it barely held together on the fork. In earlier generations, tallow also went into homemade soap and candles. One roast produced enough trimmings to fill a small jar, and that jar went further than a whole stick of butter. The butcher would have trimmed it off and thrown it away. Your grandmother turned it into the most useful thing in her kitchen. Number 6. Fish heads and tails. After cleaning a catch, most people toss the heads, tails, and backbones straight into the garbage. Your grandmother kept them. She simmered those parts in water with onion, a bay leaf, and a few peppercorns until they gave up a light, briny broth that became the base for chowder or stew. Along the Gulf Coast and in New England, fish head soup was a regular weeknight meal in households that lived close to the water. The heads held the most collagen, which meant the broth thickened naturally as it cooled. She added potatoes, corn, and whatever was around, and a pot of scraps became a chowder rich enough to serve to company. The best part of the fish was the part most people never even thought to cook. Your grandmother did not clip coupons to save money, or at least not only that. Her real savings happened at the stove. Every bone she boiled into broth was a can of stock she did not buy. Every scrap she fried into a side dish was a trip to the store she did not make. Every jar of bacon grease on the counter was a bottle of cooking oil that stayed on the shelf. She ran her kitchen the way a good mechanic runs a shop. Nothing left the building until it had given everything it could. The grocery bill that amazed her children and confused her grandchildren was not a mystery. It was the result of decades of refusing to let anything go to waste. She fed a family on what other people threw away, and she did it so quietly that most of them never noticed. Number 5. Cheese rinds. When a block of Parmesan or a wheel of aged cheddar got down to the rind, your grandmother did not throw it out. She dropped that hard, dry piece of cheese straight into a pot of soup. As it simmered, the rind softened and released a deep, salty, savory flavor into the broth that no amount of seasoning could match. Italian grandmothers kept a bag of Parmesan rinds in the freezer and added one to every pot of minestrone or bean soup they made. In the Midwest, cheddar rinds went into potato soup. Some families grated the softened rind after cooking and stirred it back into the pot for thickness. A piece of cheese too hard to slice and too small to serve became the thing that made the whole soup taste like someone had been cooking it all day. Number 4. Leftover coffee. That last cup sitting in the percolator, the one nobody wanted because it had gone bitter on the burner, had more life in it than anyone thought. Your grandmother poured it into a hot skillet where she had just fried a slice of country ham. The coffee hit the pan, picked up all the salty, smoky drippings stuck to the bottom, and turned into red-eye gravy. She poured it right over a plate of grits or biscuits, and breakfast became something that woke you up from the inside out. Red-eye gravy was a Southern staple that existed entirely because of leftover coffee. Nobody made it on purpose with a fresh pot. It only worked because the coffee was old, bitter, and strong. The perfect scrap for the perfect gravy. Number 3. Bread heels and crusts. The end slices of the loaf, the ones nobody wanted for sandwiches, collected in a paper bag on top of the icebox. When the bag was full, your grandmother dried the heels in a low oven and crushed them into breadcrumbs. Those crumbs went onto everything. She coated pork chops in them before frying. She sprinkled them over casseroles before baking. She mixed them into meatloaf to stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal for 6. In Italian-American households, breadcrumbs fried in olive oil with garlic became a pasta topping when there was no cheese in the house. They called it poor man's Parmesan. Your grandmother understood the principle. Stale bread was never finished. It just changed form. And in its new form, it made everything around it better. Number 2. Onion skins and ends. Those papery outer layers and the root ends that most people cut off and toss were the secret behind your grandmother's golden broth. She saved them in the freezer alongside all her other vegetable trimmings, and when stock day came, the onion skins did the heavy lifting. They gave the broth a deep amber color and a round, savory sweetness that no amount of salt could replace. Professional chefs today use onion skins for the same reason, but your grandmother was doing it decades before it became a restaurant technique. She did not have a word for it. She just knew the broth looked pale without those skins and rich with them. The part of the onion everyone peeled away and discarded was the part that made the whole pot sing. Number 1. The last scraps in the pot. This was not a recipe anyone planned. It was the meal that showed up on the night before grocery day, when every shelf in the kitchen held just a little of something. A few bites of pot roast from 3 days ago, 1 soft potato, the end of a bag of carrots, a cup of broth from the jar behind the milk, half a can of tomatoes. She put all of it into one heavy pot with water, salt, and a bay leaf, and she let it simmer until the whole kitchen filled up with something that smelled like a real supper. Nobody at the table asked what was in it. They did not need to. It was hot, it stretched far enough for everyone, and it meant the family ate together instead of picking through the cupboard alone. Every grandmother had her own name for it. Scrap soup, clean out the icebox stew, Monday pot. None of them made it the same way twice because the scraps were never the same twice. That was never the weakness. That was the whole design. The meal at the bottom of the list is the one at the center of everything this video is about. She looked at what other people would have thrown away, and she turned it into the reason her family sat down together. That pot was not about food. It was a promise. As long as she was standing at that stove, nothing in her kitchen went to waste, and nobody under her roof went hungry. There are times where you just absolutely do not feel like getting up and doing anything, and in those times, microwaving some mac and cheese can be really helpful. We are sure most of us have memories of spending the nights at our grandparents' and waking up to some mac and cheese in the microwave, or coming home from school to a bowl that you could lose your worries in. The cheesier it was, the happier a kid would be after eating it, and even at this adult stage of life, a hot bowl can bring all those memories flooding right back in. Mac and cheese started growing in popularity when Mississippi farm families adopted it as a regular meal, and from there onwards it spread to a lot of families everywhere across the states. We thank God for that little fact every day, since we do not know what we would do without it. Ground beef and oat loaf was the Depression's answer to meatloaf on a budget. When breadcrumbs were too dear, rolled oats stepped in, binding the meat and stretching it twice as far. Mixed with egg, onion, and a thin smear of tomato, it baked into a dense, hearty loaf that filled the kitchen with warmth. Each slice was firm and chewy, rich with the taste of hard work and determination. Served with mashed potatoes or a spoon of gravy, it gave families a sense of dignity. Real food, real effort, no waste. It was a meal of quiet pride, the kind that reminded people they could make do and still make something good. Even cold the next day, it tasted like comfort, its edges slightly sweet from the caramelized glaze. In every crumb was the story of making a little go a long way, and doing it with grace. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were the sweet, sticky, unbelievably satisfying snacks that kids begged for the moment they walked through the door after school. There was something almost magical about how two basic ingredients could turn into a treat that felt both fun and filling. Mothers loved making them because they required no cooking, no cleanup, and almost no money. Just slice a banana, spread the peanut butter thick enough that the bread stuck to your fingers, and press it all together. The moment you took a bite, the peanut butter glued everything together in that slow, chewy way that made kids talk funny until they swallowed. The bananas added just the right amount of sweetness, almost like having dessert disguised as a sandwich. Some kids liked the bread soft, others liked it lightly toasted so the peanut butter melted a little into all the corners. No matter how it was served, it always tasted like the kind of snack that made bad days better and good days even more exciting. It was also the perfect fuel for running outside to play, riding bikes, or disappearing into the backyard until dinner. Mothers loved that it kept kids full without stretching the grocery budget in any painful way. It was cheap, healthy enough for the time, and comforting in a way that never seemed to get old. These sandwiches tasted like childhood freedom, like being able to run barefoot without a care in the world. And that is exactly why kids begged for them, day after day, like it was the best invention anyone had ever come up with. Who could ever resist pancakes? Since we are visiting the all-time classics which last even today in almost every child's diet and life, it would be a crime to go without mentioning Grandma's beloved fluffy pancakes. Did you ever wonder what made hers so much fluffier? Pancake houses across the nation seemingly met their match when confronted with a 60-something-year-old grandmother who loves to spend time obsessing over her grandkids. So what is it that home chefs discovered that several brands and franchises could not? There are a few tricks they would use, like letting the egg whites relax in the batter before cooking them, or having impeccable flipping skills so just the right amount of heat gets to each side. Some would just whisk and beat their eggs and batter so well that you got one supremely thick stack of pancakes. It seems the secret was simply the years of pancake-making experience that are hard to replicate. Cabbage and sausage stew was winter's answer to hunger. In homes where meat was precious, a single sausage could flavor an entire pot. Cabbage, onion, and potato took up the rest, slow-cooked until they soaked in every drop of smoky richness. The broth was peppery, the smell both humble and hearty. Served in thick bowls with bread, it was the kind of meal that made the world seem softer for a little while. This dish crossed cultures, found in Polish, German, and African American kitchens alike, each with its own rhythm and seasoning. It was proof that good food did not need abundance, only attention. The stew tasted better the next day, its flavors deepening as the cabbage gave up its sweetness. It was the kind of meal that asked for nothing but gave everything: warmth, comfort, and the quiet assurance that spring would come again. Sloppy Joes on toasted buns were the messy, lovable dinners that 1960s kids acted like they could not live without. The name itself promised a meal where neatness did not matter. Mothers loved that 1 pound of meat could stretch far when mixed with sauce and seasonings. The skillet popped as the beef cooked, and when the sauce hit the pan, the whole house filled with that warm, tangy smell everyone recognized. The buns were lightly toasted to keep them from falling apart. Not that it ever worked. The sandwich dripped, slipped, and made a mess, and that was the entire point. Every bite was comforting and familiar, the kind of food that made a plain evening feel like something to look forward to. Mothers liked how fast and cheap it was, and kids begged for it because it felt like dinner made just for them. Sloppy Joes were childhood joy disguised as dinner. People have been putting things on top of crackers for centuries now, and enjoying it as a simple biscuit elevates meat, cheese, and just about anything else to a new height. Tuna salad with crackers was just one of many popular additions to the trend, and it is a fan favorite across the nation. Preparing the tuna salad takes a little time, but assembling it on crackers takes less than 10 minutes. Grandmas had so many recipes like this that they could just be made in a flash but would fill you up or be a kind of snack you have never had before on your own. Tuna salad on crackers is something you can make too just as easily, so give it a try if you ever have just biscuits and some tuna laying around. Ground beef and cabbage gravy over bread was the meal you made when there was almost nothing left, and somehow it still tasted like kindness. Ground beef browned with onions and cabbage made a quick, rich gravy thickened with flour and broth. It was spooned over day-old bread or toast, soaking in until it became soft and savory. The first bite warmed the chest. The second reminded you that a meal could still feel generous even when it was not. Families called it poor man's stew, but there was dignity in its making. The cabbage stretched the meat, the bread caught every drop of flavor, and together they became something greater than the sum of their parts. It was not about indulgence. It was about care and making sure everyone got their share. Cornbread and honey was one of those simple comforts that made every 1960s kid feel like they were getting away with something sweet before dinner. Mothers made cornbread from the cheapest ingredients you could find in any pantry: a little flour, a little cornmeal, a little milk, and maybe an egg if the week had been kind. The batter came together quickly, but the moment it hit the oven, the whole house transformed. That warm, buttery smell drifted through every room, telling kids exactly what was coming without a single word being spoken. When the cornbread came out, golden and steaming, it felt like a gift. Mothers sliced it into thick squares, the kind that crumbled just a little at the edges, and handed it out while it was still warm enough to melt anything that touched it. Then came the honey, drizzled or poured, depending on how generous she felt that day. The honey seeped into all the little cracks, turning a humble piece of bread into something rich and sticky and perfect. Kids loved how the sweetness balanced the savory corn flavor, creating a dessert that was not technically a dessert but felt exactly like one. It was cheap, filling, and made from ingredients almost every family always had on hand. Mothers relied on it because it stretched tight grocery budgets without ever feeling like a compromise. Kids begged for it because it tasted like warmth, like comfort, like the kind of simple sweetness that sticks in your memory long after you grow up and realize how much your mother made out of so little cornbread and honey was proof that dessert did not have to be fancy to be unforgettable. Egg salad was another classic that people would often come home to when visiting their grandparents for Thanksgiving or just on the weekend in general. Egg salad typically consists of mayonnaise, mustard, and green onions, which add both color and crunch to the dish. When you think of a salad, your mind tends to immediately think boring and unimaginative, but egg salads can toss those opinions right out the window with just one bow. Especially if your grandma left her recipe laying around in some journal or cookbook she compiled all throughout her life. Egg salad in particular would go very well with rye, and it would work as a sandwich too. Grandmas loved bringing this one along for family picnics. Mock chop suey was America's humble imitation of faraway flavors. In small-town kitchens, especially across the Midwest, families used ground beef, cabbage, celery, and onions to create something exotic without straying from local ingredients. Soy sauce, or more often a few dashes of Worcestershire and salt, gave it the illusion of Eastern spice. Everything simmered in a thick gravy and was often served over rice or noodles. For many, it was their first taste of a world beyond their own, adapted to fit Depression-era budgets. It looked different, smelled foreign, and tasted comforting all at once. Kids loved it for its savoriness, adults for how it stretched meat across several meals. Though it began as imitation, mock chop suey became its own tradition, a dish that proved you did not need authenticity to find connection, just creativity and a good skillet. Hot dog boats with melted cheese were the kind of fun, silly, absolutely irresistible meal that made every child feel like dinner had suddenly become a party. Mothers made them by slicing hot dogs down the center, filling the opening with a strip of cheese and popping them under the broiler until everything bubbled and browned. The hot dogs curled just enough to cradle the cheese, creating that little boat shape that kids thought was hilarious. The smell hit fast, a mix of smoky hot dog and melting cheese that could pull a kid from any room in the house. Mothers loved them because they were cheap, easy, and guaranteed to make even the pickiest eater happy. Kids loved them because they felt playful, almost like something from a carnival. The cheese would stretch when you took a bite, and sometimes it would drip down the side in a way that made dinner feel like an adventure. Served with a little ketchup or mustard, these boats were a masterpiece of budget cooking that tasted far richer than they really were. Kids begged for them constantly because they made dinner fun, filling, and unforgettable. They were one of those meals that captured exactly what it felt like to grow up in the 1960s. Simple joys, simple ingredients, and memories that last a lifetime. Speaking of adding butter to the mix and elevating the dish, cheese has a pretty similar effect when you mix it with some scrambled eggs. It was one of the dreamiest breakfasts you could wake up to. The scent of freshly scrambled eggs forming a clear road that guided you to the kitchen, with each step taken increasing that early morning appetite. Once you sit, you are blessed with the glorious glow of cheese mixed with shining yolk and brilliant egg whites, scrambled to complete perfection mixed in with Grandma's special seasonings. That usually just meant a dash of paprika and oregano here and there. What was truly special, though, is how Grandma would manage to melt the cheese into the egg without compromising on how scrambled it was, which is an art lost to them now. Cabbage and noodles, Pulaski style, was comfort born in coal country. It came from immigrant kitchens where butter, onions, and cabbage were fried together until caramelized, then tossed with noodles and bits of ground beef. The result was smoky, soft, and faintly sweet, a dish that felt like warmth itself. It was cheap to make, easy to love, and could feed a crowd for pennies. In Pennsylvania, mining towns, and Midwest kitchens, Pulaski became more than a meal. It was memory on a plate. The sizzle of cabbage hitting butter, the smell of onions browning in old cast iron carried a rhythm of tradition. Even without meat, it was satisfying. With it, it became a small feast. Served in big enamel bowls, it spoke of perseverance, of families who worked hard, prayed often, and found joy wherever they could. Hamburger hash was the skillet miracle that made every child in the house sprint to the kitchen the moment they smelled it cooking. Mothers made it by combining ground beef, diced potatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings they had on hand, stretching a small amount of meat into a meal that fed everyone without costing much. The potatoes would brown slowly, getting crisp on the edges and soft in the middle, while the onions melted down into something sweet and perfect. The beef sizzled alongside everything, creating this savory blend that filled the entire home with a smell that no hungry kid could resist. It was a one-pan treasure, the kind of meal that made the kitchen feel warm and alive. Kids loved it because every spoonful felt different. Some bites more potato, some more meat, some deliciously heavy on onion. It was the kind of dish you could pile high on a plate and still go back for seconds, even thirds if you were lucky. Mothers liked that it stretched ingredients, saved money, and kept stomachs full for hours. Many families added ketchup, some added gravy, some ate it exactly as it came out of the pan. There was no wrong way to enjoy hamburger hash. It was cozy, hearty, and the definition of comfort food long before that phrase became trendy. Kids begged for it because it tasted like home in the most uncomplicated way possible, like the kind of dinner that made the whole family sit together without any fuss. It was simple, cheap, and unforgettable, which is exactly why it became a quiet legend in so many 1960s homes. So our next dish comes with a bit of a history lesson that goes way further back than the time of our grandparents. Ham and cheese quesadillas may have been what they were binge eating daily and serving up to us, but where did quesadillas ever come from? Apparently, they were not an American invention, and nobody could really find a solid name that they could credit with making the idea up first, until people did some history digging and found out that. Spanish settlers that tried their hand at taking over Central America in the very early days of the land brought Mexican culture with them. The rest, as they say, is history, and the people of the USA took to quesadillas very well. especially easy variants like the ham and cheese one, which meant that you almost always had a snack that hit the taste buds just right and made you full too. The best part about quesadillas is that they are so quick to prepare and easy to make that you can enter Flavor Town in just 10-15 minutes, which is a pretty good sell for anybody. Convenient food is always the best after all. Depression-era cabbage soup was survival in a pot. It began with water, not stock, and whatever scraps the week had left behind. A ham bone, a heel of onion, a wilted carrot. Cabbage went in by the handful, sliced thin to cook down soft, its sweetness turning broth into something more than it was. Ground beef or sausage might stretch across several meals, browned just enough to flavor the pot before being set aside for tomorrow. People called it soup, but it was more like resilience simmered on the stove. It filled the belly, warmed cold hands, and kept families fed through long winters when the pantry shelves were bare. The taste was humble, peppery, cabbage sweet, sometimes smoky if luck allowed, and yet no one complained. In those days, waste was unthinkable, and gratitude was constant. That pot of cabbage soup was not just dinner, it was hope you could eat. Potato pancakes made from leftover mashed potatoes were the definition of turning almost nothing into something incredible. Mothers loved this recipe because it let them stretch every scrap and avoid waste, but kids loved it because those little golden patties tasted like a true treat. It started with a bowl of cold mashed potatoes, stiff and slightly lumpy from the night before. Mothers would mix in a little egg, a bit of flour, some onion if they had any left, and seasonings that were often more instinctual than measured. She would shape the mixture into small patties and drop them onto a hot, buttered skillet. The sound alone was enough to pull kids away from whatever they were doing. The edges browned first, creating that crispy ring that every child looked for before taking a bite. The inside stayed soft, creamy, and warm, almost like mashed potatoes in their coziest form. The contrast between the crisp exterior and the tender interior made every bite exciting. Some kids dipped them in ketchup, others ate them plain, but everyone agreed they were one of the best things to ever come out of a leftover bowl. Mothers appreciated that it cost nothing extra, but still felt like a real meal. Kids begged for them because they tasted like comfort made fresh again, like getting something new out of something old. They were the kind of food that made you forget you were eating leftovers because they were even better the second time around. Potato pancakes were a thrifty triumph, a childhood favorite, and a reminder that sometimes the best meals are the ones born out of necessity and a little creativity. There really is nothing like a grilled cheese sandwich, a meal that you have seen in the media, in kitchens, all over neighborhoods, in stalls and diners, and just about everywhere else. Sometimes you are in too much of a rush to make anything proper, or you just might only have some cheese and bread on hand. Everyone still needs to eat, but does that mean we have to wash down something we do not even like the taste of? No! And the popularity of grilled cheese sandwiches is a testament to that. But how did these sandwiches get so popular? Well, most Americans can only remember them as a loving meal that their grandmother would make in times exactly like what we described. The best part is that regardless of what kind of bread or cheese you like, every combo works just as well, which is something we cannot say about many dishes. Ground beef and turnip hash was born in farmhouse kitchens, where turnips were as plentiful as potatoes and just as important. When meat was scarce, women would dice the turnips fine, brown them with onions, and stir in a bit of ground beef for flavor. The turnips softened but kept a slight bite, their peppery taste blending beautifully with the savory meat. Everything cooked together in a skillet until golden and fragrant. It was the taste of thrift, of stretching what the land gave until it lasted through winter. Served hot with a fried egg or a slice of bread, it was a meal that required little but gave plenty. Farmers came in from the fields to eat it, grateful for its warmth and weight. It was not fancy, but it carried the flavor of resilience, the reminder that the simplest foods are often the most honest. Crispy fish sticks with ketchup were the oven-baked heroes of weeknight dinners, especially when mothers needed something quick that still felt fun. Kids knew the sound of the frozen sticks hitting the metal tray, stiff and pale before the oven worked its magic. As they baked, the smell grew warm and inviting, and kids would check the window for that golden edge that meant the crunch would be perfect. Mothers loved them because they were cheap, easy, and guaranteed to stop complaints. When the tray came out, kids rushed to the table with their plates ready. The first bite always had that satisfying crunch, followed by soft fish inside. Dip after dip into ketchup made the meal feel playful, like a tiny restaurant experience right at home. Fish sticks tasted like relaxed evenings, simple comfort, and just enough excitement to make dinner special. Kids begged for them because they never felt boring no matter how often they appeared. They were cheap, cheerful, and unforgettable. So here is a dish that you may not see coming or be prepared for, but it actually works really well this way too. We are talking about peanut butter jelly and banana toast, which is exactly what it sounds like. You take some toast, preferably toast until it's crunchy, then lather it with as much peanut butter and jelly as you desire, and layer it with sliced bananas. You may have only heard of that combo as a part of some protein shake or smoothie, but it works just as well sitting on top of bread as it does in a glass. This is also a perfectly refreshing option for when you are low on work, and grandmas obviously kept that in mind. When they could just tell that somebody in the household needed a sugar rush and a kick from behind to get them into high gear, they would feed them a lot more toast than was probably wise, but it would work every time. Beef and barley stew was built to last. One pot, one slow flame, and enough time to let the world outside freeze while the inside stayed warm. Ground beef browned first, then onions, carrots, barley, and water joined in. Nothing fancy, everything needed. As it simmered for hours, it thickened into a meal you could eat with a spoon or fork. The barley swelled, the cabbage softened, and the beef melted into the broth, turning a few scraps into something that tasted like plenty. It was food that nourished from the inside out, stretching a pound of meat across 3 days if it had to. Every kitchen had its version. More vegetables if the garden was kind, more water if times were lean. It was the taste of patience, of gratitude, and of winter's quiet victories. Grandma Olpa's apple pie is a classic that only grandmothers are aware of or know how to make, despite it being pretty simple. It's something you could make on your own, but you likely wouldn't achieve the same level of finesse. Apple pies like this one are typically filled with plenty of apples, topped with a lattice crust, and smothered in thick, rich applesauce. It would often make for the best Thanksgiving pie you could have, and they would certainly keep making it every time the holiday season came knocking. The mixture of butter sugar on the top as well as the sauce makes it unforgettable if you try it for the first time, and it is addictive enough to keep making you come back for more. This is also a recipe that grandmothers were fond of passing on. Cabbage and apple skillet was the unexpected pairing that somehow made perfect sense. Sliced apples softened alongside shreds of cabbage in a cast-iron pan, their sweetness blending with a touch of vinegar and the salt of whatever meat was available, often bacon ends or bits of beef. The result was a balance of tart and savory, sweet and smoky. It filled the home with a smell both sharp and comforting, like the promise of something good on a lean day. This dish belonged to families who used what they had, turning orchard fruit and garden cabbage into something memorable. Served alongside bread or potatoes, it brought a little color and cheer to the gray months of winter. Cabbage and apple skillet was not just food. It was proof that frugality could still taste like care, and that even hardship had room for warmth. Spaghetti with butter and Parmesan shake was one of the easiest, cheapest, and most beloved meals a mother could make in the 1960s, which is exactly why kids asked for it constantly. It started with a pot of pasta boiling on the stove, the steam fogging up the kitchen windows as the noodles softened. Kids loved watching the long strands swirl in the water like they were dancing just for them. Once drained, the pasta went back into the pot where a generous pat of butter melted instantly, coating every strand in a glossy shine. Then came the Parmesan shake, that little green can that lived in almost every pantry kids loved, doing the shaking themselves, even though mothers had to take over to prevent the entire can from dumping into the pot. The flavor was simple but perfect. Buttery, salty, warm, and comforting in a way that made you want to curl up right beside the pot with a fork. Mothers appreciated it because it cost almost nothing and took barely any time. But kids appreciated it because it felt like the kind of meal that understood them. It was soft, easy to eat, and satisfying in a way nothing else quite managed. It tasted like after-school hunger being solved in minutes. It tasted like staying up a little later than normal. It tasted like childhood in a bowl. Kids begged for this dish because it never disappointed, never felt boring, and always made everything better, even on the days that felt long and gray. Spaghetti with butter and Parmesan shake was proof that comfort did not require complicated recipes. It only required heart. Cinnamon sugar toast is a delightful breakfast combo that was a go-to for grandmas, not just for their kids and grandkids, but for their own mornings as well. Sometimes all you need from the world is a good toast and a healthy hit of glucose, and cinnamon sugar does that like nothing else. Cinnamon in particular started getting a lot more popular as an ingredient during the times most of our grandmas were alive, since a lot of bakeries started using it with maple syrup and vanilla, though it was always a popular choice. It is just that little variations in daily meals did not start popping up until the 1910s or 1920s. And since then, cinnamon has become a mainstay highlight of all things that scream USA food. Cabbage and rice bake was an act of comfort disguised as frugality. Leftover rice met cabbage and beef in a casserole dish, topped with breadcrumbs or a drizzle of milk to keep it moist. It baked until tender, the top golden, the smell rich and homey. This dish was how families turned scarcity into satisfaction. It filled bellies without emptying wallets, and its leftovers reheated even better the next day. Many cooks flavored it with paprika, garlic, or tomato, each one adding their own touch of love. The rice made it stretch further, the cabbage made it wholesome, the beef made it feel complete. Served in deep scoops with bread and butter, it was more than a meal. It was reassurance that even hard times could taste good. In quiet kitchens across America, cabbage and rice bake became the taste of perseverance made edible. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of meal that felt special even though everything came from a can or a simple package. Mothers liked it because it was easy, and kids loved that sweet and salty mix that felt like comfort in a bowl. She sliced the hot dogs, let them sizzle in a skillet, then poured the thick beans over the top so everything could bubble together. The smell alone made kids hover around the stove waiting for their plates. It was cheap, filling, and needed nothing but a fork or a piece of toast to feel complete. Some families added onions, others kept it plain, but every family agreed it tasted like the best kind of simplicity. It reminded kids of slow evenings, a little extra fun, and moments when something ordinary felt exciting. Hot dogs and pork and beans were joyful, easy, and exactly what childhood dinners were supposed to feel like. Buttered noodles are a dish so strongly associated with the elderly that they even have another name. Introducing Grandma's noodles, which were a staple of any family gathering back when simple dishes like this were still enough to leave a great impression on everyone at the table. The eggs made you feel great because they added a very warm feeling to the dish as well as being great for you. The butter itself was just the right touch that the dish needed and brought out the chewy sensation of the noodles so much more, and the overall flavor was something a mix between creamy chicken noodles and chicken cooked in butter, shredded and diced with vegetables. It screamed love in every sense of the word because it was a dish that took effort and, more than anything else, a lot of attention to detail to nail. But if that's the job, then there's no one better for it than the grandmas of the country. Cabbage and dumpling pot was a meal that filled both stomachs and hearts when little else could. It started with a pot of broth, sometimes made from beef bones, sometimes just salted water, and a heap of sliced cabbage simmering slowly until tender. Then came the dumplings, spoonfuls of soft flour dough dropped directly into the bubbling pot. They puffed up as they cooked, absorbing the savory flavor of the broth and the sweetness of the cabbage. The result was a meal thick and comforting enough to feed a family through the coldest night. It smelled like home and patience, like something that had taken time even when there was not much to spare. No one went hungry around that pot, and even the simplest ingredients tasted rich when shared with love. It was the kind of food that made silence at the table feel like gratitude. Macaroni with butter and cheese powder was one of the most requested comfort meals of the entire decade. A dish that took almost no time to make but somehow lived rent-free in the memories of every child who grew up in the 1960s. It started with a simple pot of boiling water and a box that promised creamy, cheesy goodness without costing very much at all. Those little elbow noodles dropped into the water like tiny soldiers, rising and sinking while kids watched the steam swirl around the kitchen. When the noodles softened and the water got drained, that was when the magic began. A little butter, a little milk, and that iconic packet of cheese powder turned everything bright orange in a way that felt exciting, almost like you were watching color appear right out of thin air. Kids loved stirring it, even if their mothers always had to fix it afterward because kids never quite got the cheese mixed in all the way. But the taste was what mattered. It was salty, creamy, warm, and cozy, like taking a bite out of happiness itself. It stuck to the spoon in a way that promised you would not be hungry again anytime soon. Mothers served it on busy nights, lazy afternoons, weekends, and days when the weather looked gloomy and everyone needed something cheerful. It was cheap, filling, and dependable, the kind of meal that felt like a little celebration even when there was no reason to celebrate. Kids begged for it constantly, probably more than any other meal because it tasted like childhood in its simplest form. No pretension, no fuss, just pure comfort that came from a box and made the whole day feel better. Imagine you're at a snack bar surrounded by croutons and peri-peri bites, but no garlic bread bites. You try something else in order to fill the craving, but nothing really seems to be doing the trick. Whatever is on deck is just not that tasty, and you seem to be recalling memories from days past. Your grandma would make more garlic bread bites than was probably healthy for children, but who could stop her from making everyone's day? The bites were so delicious and had the perfect amount of crunch, but also great potential for munching as you watched a movie or a show. That still holds up exactly the same today, so people often get to making them because they are so easy and take barely 10 minutes. Watch out, because this just might take popcorn out of your rotation if you have not experienced its magic before. Ground beef and potato hash was the week's final meal. Everything leftover fried together until golden and good. Cold potatoes were diced, onions chopped, and ground beef stirred in, sizzling in bacon grease until the edges crisped. The sound alone could make a kitchen feel alive again. It was working people's food, simple and sustaining. The kind of meal that made no apologies for being plain because it did not have to. Served hot from cast iron, it was eaten with ketchup, pickles, or whatever condiment the cupboard still had. In some homes, an egg might crown the top, a small luxury that made it feel like something more. Families called it hash, but it was really a story of thrift, of making beauty from what remained. Every bite carried the smoky taste of labor and care, the warmth of food cooked slow and shared fast. Tomato soup with grilled cheese was the rainy day classic that never failed to make kids feel warm from the inside out. The moment a storm cloud rolled in, kids would start hoping their mothers would make this exact combo because nothing else matched the feeling of dipping a buttery sandwich into a bowl of steaming soup. The soup usually came straight from a can, cheap and dependable, mixed with water or milk to make it smoother. As it heated, the rich tomato smell filled the room, promising comfort before you even took the first bite. Meanwhile, the grilled cheese sizzled in a pan, the bread crisping in butter until it turned that perfect shade of golden brown. When the cheese melted completely, stretching in strings when you pulled the sandwich apart, you knew dinner was going to be perfect. Kids could barely wait for the soup to cool down before dipping the sandwich into it, soaking up all that warmth and flavor in one bite. It was simple, cheap, and so easy that mothers could make it even on their most exhausted days. But it never felt tired or ordinary. It felt like kindness in a bowl. It tasted like being taken care of. Kids begged for this meal because it felt like a warm hug, the food equivalent of being wrapped in a blanket while the world outside stayed cold and gray. It was childhood comfort at its absolute best. Nobody is a stranger to wraps and how they dominate the bread world as one of the best things you could do with dough or pita or whatever wrap you have. Honey mustard chicken wraps are one kind in particular that have been really popular all over America, since a lot of families grew up eating these or bringing them to school. They were one of the most commonly demanded things to eat. Everywhere you would go, there was a craze for honey mustard wraps that was hard to beat out and impossible to escape. McDonald's had their own budget-friendly versions that did amazingly well with the people too, and home chefs soon found ways to even copy that. As a result, these chicken wraps have become a regular part of the average American diet plan. Also, they just work so well since they are pretty quick to eat too and can be made pretty fast as well. If you know what you are doing, 10 minutes is all you need to assemble and have a wrap ready to go. Cabbage and tomato skillet was what you made when there was nothing left to make. Ground beef, shredded cabbage, canned tomatoes, and onion, fried together until the house smelled like survival. It was not elegant, but it was honest. Every spoonful delivered the bite of pepper and the sweetness of cooked-down cabbage, proof that even a few cheap ingredients could become a family's dinner. This was the food of mill towns, tenant farms, and one-room apartments where every penny mattered. It cooked fast, served plenty, and left almost nothing to clean up. A working mother's blessing. The color alone was cheerful, red and green against the gray of winter. And though no one wrote down the recipe, everyone remembered it. The cabbage and tomato skillet was not about perfection, it was about endurance, the kind that fed both hunger and hope. Baked beans on toast were the sweet and savory treat that 1960s kids loved far more than anyone would expect from something so modest. The beans came from a can, thick and glossy, smelling like brown sugar and slow cooking. Even though they had been made in a factory, mothers heated them in a pot until they bubbled softly, creating a scent that made hungry kids rush into the kitchen. While the beans warmed up, the bread went into the toaster, and that crispy foundation was what made the whole thing feel special. Once the toast popped, mothers would spoon the beans on top until the entire surface was covered, letting the sauce drip over the sides. Kids dug in immediately, often burning their tongues because they were too impatient to wait. The contrast of crunchy toast and soft beans made every bite feel exciting, and the sweetness in the sauce made it taste almost like a dessert pretending to be dinner. It was cheap, quick, and undeniably comforting. Mothers relied on it during tight weeks when money was short and time was even shorter. Kids begged for it not because it was fancy, but because it was dependable, delicious, and somehow always tasted better at night when the whole house felt quiet. It was one of those meals that did not try to impress anyone, and yet it impressed kids every single time. That is the list. 25 scraps that never saw the inside of a garbage can because your grandmother knew better. She knew that a bone still had soup in it, that grease still had flavor left, that stale bread still had a purpose. This week, try one yourself. Save your chicken bones, keep your bacon grease, fry those potato peels instead of throwing them out. Then come back and tell me which scrap you saved and what you made with it. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and until next time, take care of yourselves.